All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another Expert Advice Live from Student Doctor Network. Tonight, we're going to be tackling working experiences with Dr. Neil Chuck, Head of Advising Services for the Health Professional Student Association. Dr. Chuck, how are you doing this evening?
Pretty good. How are you, Kyle?
I have nothing valid to complain about, which is my litmus for life is going okay. No matter how much I want to gripe, it ain't worth it anymore.
Very, very well. All right.
Hey, so you guys watching at home, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will address them. So rather than me talking anymore, first question, what makes a good activities description?
So we're focusing today on work and activities. And so there's a lot on the internet and there's a lot that's out there of advice on how to write an activities description. So we're going to go over at least my opinion or my perspective about it. But we have pinned threads, a pinned thread on the forums, on the pre-med forum for sure. That really is a collection of a lot of different advice from people discussing how do I write this and so forth. So I have not read or summarized any of those threads in my answers to this this webinar today. So feel free, and I encourage you to get as much advice and process it the way that you feel best articulates what you're looking for. But for this question, what makes a good activities description? I like to just basically say, if you really want to really get to the point, it's very concise. It's to the point. It can be short, but I understand it's hard to say you want it to be short given that you have certain character constraints. So we'll go over a little bit of what makes a very strong activities description. I like to tell people working activities is really a standardized resume. And so if you think about it that way, your activities description presents a professional vision or description of what you did for each of the major experiences that you participated in that contribute towards your overall preparation and readiness to be a physician or a dentist or whatever other health professional field that you seem to be pursuing. So very much in short, it's got to be professional and it's got to be concise. If you do those two things, that's what makes an activities description very good for me.
Yeah, professional and concise seems to be a recurring theme for all elements of writing in the application process, for a good reason. All right, how do I classify my activities?
So you'll have to look at each application service. And I think on the forums, we put some links for at least the major application services that we will be talking about, which is TMDSAS, AMCAS, and ADSAS. I'm sure VimCAS, I think we also put some descriptions there. But whatever central application service you're using in the health professions world, PharmCAS, OptomCAS, or whatever else, just go to the help instructions and they'll be able to articulate the classifications that you have. And normally with each classification or category that they list, they give at least a general description or a definition of what the activity, of what you can assign a category to an activity that you describe. Obviously, it's not necessarily a hard and fast science. You are not being graded for how accurate you are classifying your activity, but come pretty darn close if you possibly can. It's really important that you do, at least to the best of your ability, be as accurate as you possibly can with your classification of activities. On the admission side, what we wind up doing is we get an estimate based on your input of the tagged information that you will put in the header of each activity. And we will get an idea of how many hours you've spent in, say, clinical experience or non-clinical volunteering or research or something like that. So your classification helps us with that ultimate subcalculation to get a sense of how balanced your application is in terms of your activities and the distribution of hours that you will talk about. So that's why that's important. But we understand sometimes it's a real fuzzy area to classify an activity. So those hours that are calculated are not set in stone for us, for good admissions committees anyway. We realize we still have to go in and maybe do our own homework. We might tweak the calculations as we need to on that side of the house, but do the best that you can based on the definitions given to you in the application service and the application help.
Perfect. How do I signal some of my activities as significant?
So I'm going to start off with programs or applications like AdSAS. AdSAS, basically, if you're going to say that you have activities that are significant, you don't get extra space in order for you to really discuss, or you normally don't get extra space to discuss why this activity is very significant or not. So clearly that comes in the way that you describe your activities, and hopefully at some point you can articulate or at least express the fact that this is a significant activity. I mean, not necessarily with those words, but sometimes you may just have to use those words. So you can be very clear and very apparent that this was a significant activity. That's just a suggestion, certainly on a first draft for sure, and you can refine it later on. Now, certainly TMDSAS and AMCAS both have opportunities where you can identify an activity as being significant or meaningful. So maybe on AdSAS you have a checkbox to say this is a meaningful activity, but you don't get another additional essay to write. Whereas I think on TMDSAS and AMCAS you do. If you click on yes, this is a significant or meaningful activity, you get another box. You get another box to really start writing more about why such an activity was significant or meaningful to you. So just check how each of your application services allows you to, bring a little bit of a spotlight to help anyone who reads your application kind of focus on what are the things that you feel are most important for anyone to know about your activities. Again, this is a resume, and so you don't normally get the chance like you would on a resume to bring significant activities closer to the top of your resume sheet. So this is probably the next best thing.
Understood. Perfect. Should I include any activities or honors that I got during high school? See, luckily for me, I can't remember that far back.
And so in all fairness, for more non-traditional students who can't remember that far back, the general answer I would give is no, you don't need to. There's probably a number of very rare exceptions where something that you did in high school, you could possibly list as maybe a significant honor, but it might not, but I wouldn't necessarily highlight it as like the most important thing you've ever done. But it might be significant. So something like Eagle Scouts, and I don't remember what the Girl Scout equivalent of Eagle Scout is, but doing something where you have this clear project, say, for example, where you're helping the community or you're doing something, and you did that as a high school student, and there's only so many people that get Eagle Scout commendations, and in general, those are things that I would want you to consider. Some significant scholarships that are only given to you for transitioning from high school to college, such as a major national scholarship, such as I believe the Jack Kent Cooke Scholarship. I think that's still around. It really helps people who are like first generation or people transitioning from community college, people from who are new citizens or immigrant citizens or whatever. Read the categories and read the instructions about how to describe people who receive those types of scholarships. Anything that is like a national competitive award like those, or something like you won like a grand prize at like the International Science Fair, National Spelling Bee. I mean, you could possibly even say you won Teen Jeopardy or something like that. That would be among the areas where it's like you got some sort of national level recognition, like as a presidential scholar, something like that. I would that's probably the bar I would use to say whether I would include that honor or activity in high school. Other things like I was part of National Honor Society, you don't need to include anything like that. So I would certainly say whatever you do, keep it certainly more focused on what you did at least starting in college, if you're able to. If you had some activities that transitioned from when you were in high school to college, I guess we can talk about it. But for the most part, you really want to focus on, for those of you who are undergrads or graduating undergrads, it's this time period that you did while you were in college. For those of you who are non-traditional, certainly you have a lot more to play with, but you don't have to go all the way back to high school.
All right, question from the audience. Yoga Pimple asks, I started a free tutoring program and tutored 50 students for free for over a year. My advisor told me to list it as volunteering, but would teach tutoring be a more honest classification?
Well, so first of all, as I mentioned, no admissions committee is going to like penalize you for miscategorizing your experience. I don't know all the details of your specific experience or this program one way or another. I would certainly say if you're focusing on the fact that you're tutoring students, I would be more inclined to say, yeah, classify it as teaching and tutoring. If it was something a little bit more administrative, maybe you could possibly do it as volunteering. Again, check the definition that the application service provides in classifying it one way versus another way. As I said, this is not an exact science. There's probably some merit that your advisor has in terms of suggesting it, but I think if your own gut instinct tells you you probably are going to should classify it as teaching and tutoring because that's what you're going to talk about, it probably makes more sense to do that.
Excellent. Another question here. I was a secretary for an organization for 1 year and a member for the same organization for all 4. But I put this activity in 2 separate actions, one in leadership and one in extracurricular.
So obviously, thank you for this question. It is so common, obviously, because many of you have been involved in, if I'm talking undergrads for sure, have been involved with certain clubs for a pretty long period of time. And certainly you don't become an officer until you have a little bit more experience. In my mind, when you're thinking about doing this on a resume, what do you highlight on? You highlight on the most recent experience, the most recent achievement. So if you think about it that way, you can talk about the fact that you've been involved in an organization for a long period of time, but focus on the most recent responsibilities that you've had as a leader. And so use the secretary position that you've had over this past year as your gateway to talk about overall what this organization does. You recently, became secretary. Here are your responsibilities. If you wind up, say, being elected president for the following year, you could probably put a line in there saying, hey, I'm going to be president during the application cycle. So I would not separate them into 2 sections for this description, in that you're really going to focus on the organization, your role in the organization, and what sort of impact you've made with that organization, and just kind of move it from there. I don't think you necessarily need 2 separate sections for it, at least for the way that you've described it here.
All right, Nikita, thank you for the question. Guys, keep the questions coming. We'll do our best to get to all of them. We have a lot to cover, though. If we don't get to your question, hop on the SDN forums. Lots of people there with a lot of information that can help you out. All right, this is a good one. How do I talk about activities that I'm continuing or will start during my application cycle?
So we mentioned with the last question about what you do if you're currently involved in a club and perhaps you're going to assume a different leadership role. So hopefully I've given you some ideas about what you've done most recently, focused on your most recent sort of achievements, your leadership roles, and whatever else. Now, if you're talking about you've just recently started some activity, some community service project that only starts this upcoming month, say, for example, like near the start of May, and it'll continue throughout the summer. So how would you talk about that? Certainly, think about it this way. You're certainly allowed to talk about in your transcript entry in progress or planned coursework. So you would probably approach it very similarly here too. So you can talk about the activities based on the amount that you already have done and some things that you anticipate, things that you're going to anticipate when it comes to your impact or, the resolution of that opportunity, whatever that is. So give us an idea of why you're doing this activity, what things you've already done, and what things you're looking forward to. So these are just some suggestions. You do have to make sure you put in at least a good estimate for how many hours it involves, the time window where you're going to be continuing on to this project. Again, just like we don't normally put a whole ton of weight on your in progress or planned coursework, we don't put as much weight on, telling us, you're promising us this is what's going to happen. It might or it might not, but we certainly understand it. Think of it as a resume. It's something that you've just started and you can kind of go from there. Now, for those of you who have absolutely not started your activity, I would likely have you think about waiting until you've at least completed, I would say, about 100 hours of work before submitting it, just so that I would certainly say for most jobs, for example, you're on a probation for about 80 to 100 hours. So you could theoretically leave in good standing from your job without really making waves. Although I would expect that you should work it out before you leave your job. Don't just ghost people. But on the other hand, I would want you to have a good sense of whether the job is something you really want to do, you really like to work with your team, your supervisor, the project is there, or certainly under current circumstances, if funding drops out and you get kicked out of this program because they shutter it, that's hard. So you want to think about that maybe you need to make sure you're comfortable and you're secure in that position or that activity before promising it, or at least writing it up as such. So I know for many of you, it will mean that you probably want to push back a little bit your submission date, but that's perfectly fine. If early is still fairly early in terms of, the months of June and July. You just want to be sure you are as complete as you possibly can with your application. Early does not necessarily help you if you wind up having to sort of say, well, that project didn't actually start because we lost funding. That kind of feels weird, right? So don't put yourself in a weird bind.
Makes sense to me. What are some tips about writing effective descriptions?
So as I mentioned, think about it as a resume. When I look at resumes for jobs or for hiring people, whether it's for a lab or for whatever else, I want to basically know, what do you know? What have you done? What impact have you made? So it's very important for you to think about the person reading your application. What are we looking for? We're looking for, what have you done? What have you learned? And what is your impact? And why am I reading this? Why is this important to you? There's going to be a lot of different other people who have different questions that'll prompt you to kind of help you structure what some of those effective descriptions would really be. But quite frankly, just rely on that, and remember, keep it professional, keep it concise, but really articulate the impact of what you did and the impact on others, the impact on your project, as well as the impact on you. For many people, for research, this is where you could say, if you only had one poster you presented, put it at the end. Say, I presented this data at a research conference, or this data will be part of a future peer-reviewed publication, something like that. Near the very end, you can do that. But the important part is what you did, what you learned, why is this important, what you got out of it. Kind of go from there. If you keep it that way, you're going to be fine.
All right, perfect. Question from 142nd. I intend to designate my basic research as a most meaningful. Would it be better to use the extra space to tell a discrete story or describe my longer term progression in the lab?
Well, that actually goes to the next question that's in our card list. So thank you for anticipating that, and good luck with you in terms of writing about your research. So one of the things that you have to understand for many of you, and again, I'm going to assume you're talking about AMCAS, because TMDSAS is a little bit different. I'm also going to presume you're only applying MD, because MD PhD has a lot of different other opportunities to talk about research as well. So, if you're talking about basic research, would it be better to use the space to tell a discrete story or to describe my longer term progression in the lab? Well, first of all, I don't know your story. I don't know what you would answer. So understand, this is where I'm coming from, because we're completely on the blind side of this. But I would focus on the fact that, when we're asking you on AMCAS to write a most meaningful experience, the most important part about that 1,325 character essay is the fact that you need to tell us meaningful. I am not interested, and I am sort of interested, but not really that interested in reading about an experience in your lab. I'm interested in wondering why it's meaningful. So when you say to tell a discrete story, as long as you tell me at some point it supports the fact that you felt this experience was meaningful, you're good. If you're talking about your longer term progression in the lab, and so you're going to highlight, hey, this is my capacity for growth, my capacity to learn and appreciate the scientific method. Tell us that's the meaningfulness of your experience, and use that to support your supporting material to show this, basically. So it's a little, so I really want to emphasize to you, it's not that I really want you to go away from stories, but I do really want you to go away from stories just for the purposes of storytelling. A resume is a professional document. I'm not interested in reading essentially a 15-chapter story of vignettes of your diary, which is what a lot of people will tend to do if you over rely on stories in writing your work and activities.
Yeah, as somebody who used to be a hiring manager, like when a cover letter has a story, it was like an instant, like, congratulations, we're not moving forward. So tell us what matters and why it matters. All right, what are some tips about writing meaningful experience essays? TMD SAS allows for 3 signals for 500 words each, estimated 2,500 to 3,000 characters, AMCAS 3 signals, 1,325 characters, CASPA 2,500.
So my previous answer pretty much covers a lot of some examples of some tips, but this question, I really want you to focus on the space. I want you to understand that not every most meaningful experience essay has the same number of words or characters that's allowed for you. Keep that in mind. There's no cookie cutter size if you're trying to apply for both AMCAS and TMD SAS. So just, understand you want to be concise, but you want to hit the point. This is a meaningful experience because, and I'll show you an example of it, or I will show you just some general things that I got out of it. So, don't tell stories just for entertaining me. I'm not here to be entertained. I'm here to evaluate your professionalism and your professional preparation for our program. So keep that in mind. Stay informed and stay within the constraints of the answer boxes that you have for those essays.
Perfect. All right, this is a good one. I already discussed my 3 meaningful activities in my personal statement. Must I choose different activities for MMEs in AMCAS TMD SAS working activities?
So this is a very common question because I'm sure many of you have wrangled over the fact that you express these stories and you really try to show a beeline to your competency development in your personal essays. And then now you have, because I know when the first year that most meaningful experiences came out, this is the question that freaked everybody out. This is like, oh my God, I spent so much time trying to wordsmith my personal statement and highlight 3 activities. Now I have to think of 3 different activities. Is that true? And I'm like going, probably. It's my best answer for you. I don't think it's really great to repeat answers or repeat information that you've already disclosed. So I would really tell you that, again, activities should be pretty, I won't say complicated or complex, but they really are. If you're talking about a clinical experience and you're talking about your interaction with one patient in your personal statement, is that all you did? Is that all you got out of your experience working in the clinic? Maybe it is, but I hope that there is a lot more with regards to your involvement in a clinic, or even maybe a little bit of a better example, though still pretty similar. If you're doing something in a community service project and you talk about your one-on-one opportunity where you're basically taking history information about a potential patient that you're going to be seeing as part of your free clinic. There's more to how meaningful that free clinic experience really is for you. Maybe what you can talk about in your personal statement, your most meaningful experiences, is a different combination of competencies. Again, the AMCAS competencies are your friend here. So if you're talking about empathy, compassion, individual sort of connection through cultural competency in your personal statement, think about some different competencies that you can also highlight that experience also helped you gain insight into. So teamwork, things like, responsibility and reliability, adaptability, those other competencies also help you out. So I think it's always good to choose different activities because you might want to highlight the fact that you aren't only focused on one competency or a couple of competencies for each experience, that you really grew overall professionally with all of your competencies and not just a select few.
Okay, thank you. That's info I needed at least. All right, question from David Kim. What activity section would a literature review research project where I conducted my own literature review and published in a club journal on disproportionate health outcomes in COVID-19 patients. So where would that go?
I mean, first of all, I commend you for having some sort of a literature review, and if it looks like you got it published in a journal, fantastic. I mean, maybe probably the easiest thing to do is, yeah, you could probably put it in a publication. That's probably your easiest sort of nod in terms if you have that spot to fill. Now, we can argue a little bit, and I don't know if I have more a question card on this. If you only have one publication, should you really use one of your slots for it? That's a little bit of a different argument philosophically. We can go into that if we need to. So as I said, this is just a suggestion. Ask a lot of other people around there. Also think about how you would present this. If you're just presenting this as a product of some scholarly work that you did, or something that you did when it comes to an independent research project that you did for credit or something like that, hey, saying it's the publication is appropriate. But if you wanted to use that as something that's a product of a process, like you were doing research and you wanted to really expand and explore the research process in a description, and it resulted in you having a publication of your literature review, that's something you can also possibly consider. Again, think it out, talk to many of your advisors or talk to a lot of other people. Either one of those options will work.
Great. All right, and David, I hope that answered your follow-up question as well. I have more activities I want to include than there are spaces. How do I choose what to include?
Well, I know this is very common, especially for non-traditional students. So you have you've had a lot of things that you've done, and you fortunately only have a limited number of spaces. As we're not writing an entire academic CV where literally you have no limit in terms of the number of pages you can provide. But there's nobody in a hiring manager role or even in admissions that wants to read a 50-page curriculum vitae. So not for a job if we can help it. That the hiring for faculty, that's a totally different rule. But I don't know. I won't go into all the research on that side of the house. So if you have more activities than you want to include than there are spaces, how do you choose? So first of all, as I mentioned, the AAMC, AMCAS pre-professional competencies are your best friends. Think about, and I think a lot of people, I've seen people generate templates to help them write their working activities. They have a little section here because AAMC has this wonderful workbook about anatomy of an applicant. And one of the things they like to highlight is show us your activities and how they help you articulate your growth in a specific competency or combination of competencies. So you can use the competencies to also help guide you by mapping out how well you at least approach a vast majority of your competencies. How many of them focus on teamwork? How many focus on cultural humility and cultural awareness? How many focus on reliability, dependability, ethics, integrity, all of those sorts of things? You have a roadmap and you have 11 competencies. So you've got 15 spots, 11 competencies. Not necessarily one-on-one is what I'm looking for, but you should be able to have enough overlap with all of those things and be able to construct your activities that way. Secondly, and most importantly also is, remember it's a resume. Your most important, most relevant experiences count. And if you include trivial things, they need to have a specific purpose. We can go into whether you want to include hobbies or not as one example. I would say, yeah, you probably should put one hobby. Don't give me 5 hobbies. You can give me 1. That's okay. That's my personal opinion on that. And there are other people that probably say you could do more than 1. Again, everybody is different. But every one of those spots, you need to value those spots as a signal that points to your professional and personal preparation for the health professional career you're trying to pick.
Sorry for the little delay there. This question just came in. I like this one. Do medical schools contact everyone listed? I've not spoken with my PI in over 6 years, and he has not responded to me. I have 2 publications with him listed.
Oh, so first of all, if we're just talking research, I'm going to presume you're just applying to medical school, MD or DO. You're not applying MD, PhD, or to PhD programs. Those rules will be very different. So, and some schools, again, if we're talking, you're going to go for a research track and you're going for a research scholarship or something, sure, there will be opportunities where those people will do that. But in a world of health professions or medical school admissions, where we've got thousands to tens of thousands of applications we've got to filter through, do we contact every single one of the 10,000 times 15 people if you have 15 contacts listed? No, of course we won't do that. We might eventually at some point, if you get to some finalist phase or something like that, maybe that's possible. But in general, I don't want to put the fear of God in you to say that, I've never talked to my PI. Will my PI, be contacted about it? In general, they wouldn't, unless we're talking about maybe MD, PhD. That might be the only circumstance that I would certainly say you need to do that. But MD, PhD will be very different. You've got a 10,000 character significant research experience essay, and you're going to have to list all your principal investigators that you worked for and the projects and the labs that you happen to be involved in. If you haven't spoken to them in 6 years, some schools like Harvard probably would have an issue with that. Other schools probably won't. So no set rule about it, but don't think that the admissions team has enough time to contact every contact that you list on your application before you interview, for sure.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that question. Another question here. Is only having 8 to 9 activities listed too little?
That's also a good question, and I don't know because I have not met you. I don't know why you only would list 8 or 9 activities. Certainly, if they cover in depth all the things that you want people to know about you in terms of your professional preparation, and even you've added maybe one hobby, that's fantastic. This is the question of, do you want to fill the purse? And so, do you really feel like you have to use all 15 spots? I think you'll hear a lot of people say, get at least close. It's like writing a personal statement with only 2,000 characters if you're given 5,000. How does that really feel? So for most of us who I'm sure are pre-meds or even people who apply to schools like that, you want to use as much of the space as you're given. Do not feel compelled to completely fill the space. But if you only have 8 or 9 activities, if those are significant activities that you articulate their value to show why you're prepared for a health professional career, that's all you've got. That's all you've got. I wouldn't want you to make up stuff or add stuff that's promised because these are future activities or aspirational things that you want to have done. I wouldn't add an additional 4 or 5 or 6 different hobbies or, whatever else, but work very closely to see, how would you fill the space? It's, again, just like a resume. And maybe in your resume, you only have 8 or 9 things instead of like 12 or 13. If that's what you have, that's what you have.
Perfect. Dinesh, thank you for the question. I'm in the same boat, and I figured, well, as long as it's quality and represents what I'm about here, that's going to matter a lot more than just filling it out for the sake of filling it out. All right, next question. Can I have my activities listed in an order that I want clinical? I didn't say that correctly grammatically. Sorry. Clinical experiences first, then non-clinical research, etc.
So unfortunately, this is not an actual real resume where if you controlled your resume, you control your white space and you can list things as like your most relevant experiences in clinic versus your community service versus your research. You could do that. This is unfortunately a standardized resume. So for the most part, the application services organize it for you and you don't get to organize it the way you want to. So consequently, I think for AMCAS for sure, and I'm fairly sure for the other application services, they will organize everything in reverse chronological order. That's my understanding of it. So whatever you've done most recently or currently typically should be listed first if one were to read it as if you were printing the entire AMCAS application and proceed further to your oldest activities or undated activities. So that's, therefore your hobby should be at the end or close to the end if you did it that way. So unfortunately, there's no control over the way you see your activities listed. On the other hand, I will tell you on the admissions side, remember, we're not actually dealing with literal paper or even PDFs anymore. We are dealing with online portals and, and user interfaces. So things are all done in a way that we could find ways where, okay, we can list all of your activities, but now we can filter too. So we can filter activities, arrange activities in the ways that we on the admissions team can look at your application and your activity. So we can look at it and say, let's look at your clinical experiences, and then let's look at your research, or let's look at your hobbies, or remember of the categories that you listed originally on your application. We'll just filter for just your publications or your hobbies or whatever. That's how that works. And we have the control on the admissions team side to organize your activities in an order that I will just say we want, not necessarily what you want. So I'm afraid to say that you can't control it, but the admissions team finds ways to.
All right, sounds good. And we have a question from Charbel that would hit on the next thing we had in our question list. I'm in a research lab through a fellowship and working on presentations and my honors thesis. Should I list everything under one research entry or separate them into categories like research or awards?
So this is the conundrum for all of you guys doing research. So I would certainly say think very carefully about being involved in research and how you want to weigh the value of that experience. What are the competencies you want to articulate? Certainly, for any research opportunity, as I mentioned, I'm looking for, as a fellow researcher, I'm looking for some basics. What is the lab that your work with study on? What's your particular role or project within the lab? What are some of the results that you were able to find, or at least a hypothesis you were addressing or you're trying to measure, and what techniques did you use? What are some results that you found or some conclusions? And what are some products? What is the impact? So, if 700 characters, if we're doing AMCAS, isn't enough, all right, we might have to think about it. That may be something to say, hey, I'll put in a separate entry for the output of my research, which is at publications and presentations under a separate entry, if that's what you want to do. Others just sort of depends. You can kind of hook it all up together. There's no set rule, I guess, is the nice part about it. But then again, from your own side, that therefore means there's no set rule. While you can do everything you want to, you'll just be anxious about the way you do it. Again, this is not, this is different for if you're doing MD PhD, because MD PhD, you have for the MD PhD application, and I think there's even one on TMD SAS, you have a separate box to really go into much greater detail about the research that you did, and then you probably will have space to mention my research was the basis of my honors thesis, and I also was able to present this at this conference. This is going to be in a peer-reviewed paper, all this other fun stuff. So, I think it really will depend on how much you are able to talk about your own research and the impact or products thereafter to conclude your description.
Great. Thank you for that question, Charbel. All right. I started research in the lab as an undergrad. I've since graduated and continuing my research as a lab tech in the same lab. How do I describe this?
So that's also a great question. And I'm very certain that many of you, and certainly many of the people preceding you who've applied, have had that situation where you're continuing your research, but you graduated. So you got hired as a research assistant and you're now employed. So first of all is the categorization. Do you talk about it as research or you talk about it as employment? Again, the usual convention that I like is certainly highlighted as, at this point, if you're now hired, go from the standpoint from what you currently are, your most recent position. So if you were hired into the lab, I would put it under employment. If you're still volunteering in the lab and a student, okay, then you can kind of put it under research. There again, there's not a hard set answer. You could possibly just still put it as research and just mention that you got hired for this next upcoming year being a lab tech. There's no fast and set rule about it. But whatever you do, just make sure you put in the entries appropriately, the dates that you were working, including the dates and future dates if you're current or present if you're currently hired as a lab tech. So, you don't need to split it up into two different entries. You can keep it as one entry because it's a continuing activity. Highlight your most recent, position, the current position that you hold, and then you can kind of run from there.
All right, sounds good. And guys, thank you for the questions. If we don't get to your question, please go to the Student Doctor Network forums. The pre-medical forums have a lot of threads dealing with all of these things. Somebody else has had the same question. You'll be able to find help there. All right, I did a semester abroad and took classes. Is this an activity I should include?
So, okay, so a lot of your peers, or if it's not you, have done this. So you've gone to a semester abroad, you may have taken some classes, and how do you describe it? Well, first of all, this goes back to the transcript entry side of things. If you were taking classes, how does it appear in your transcript? And, obviously there you will have a document of what your classes are. So in a work and activity section, should you describe this study abroad experience as something, that you want to include in your list of 15, you don't need to give me necessarily the course, like the index courses, but you probably could if you wanted to. We'll ultimately figure it out, but feel free if you really wanted to put courses down to put it in. But think much more about what you gained in terms of your study abroad experience. If you wanted to talk about this is a great time for you to get out of American culture and see a different culture. And so you want to highlight this cultural awareness piece, competency piece. That's something that you gain by doing your semester abroad and taking classes under a different social, political, educational system. Do whatever you need to do and put that in your description as you need to. But don't feel compelled. But I'm fairly certain that most people who do study abroad like to talk about it. It's like, this was my summer semester in Singapore or something like that. It's great to put in there, especially if you're doing study abroad, because at least for those people who do traditional interviews, it's like, oh, I saw you went out of the country. Tell me a little more about it. It's sort of like the hobbies thing. So it's a nice sort of softball to give anybody who ultimately want to interview you. So if you can do it, why not include it?
All right, sounds good. I like this question from 142nd. For common activities such as serving as a TA, do you need to spend characters defining the responsibilities of the role? Thank you for that question. That's good.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, I don't know. I think this goes to the same question of, is one TA is a TA always a TA in every single situation? You may not have to spend a whole ton of detail about the types of responsibilities, but it's still sort of important to know what I will call the impact part of it. So if you were a TA, how many students did you actually TA for? How large was your TA team if you were not the only one? So you probably met with maybe 2 or 3 other people, and you met with your faculty member who's responsible for the course to kind of go over common problems that you're all having. So part of it is, that's part of your responsibility too. So, I mean, I think about what you're doing. Think about, again, the competencies you want to highlight. Sure, everyone who TAs can TA, but it might be different. You might have more lab responsibilities. You might have a little bit more license or license to actually create your own like study guides. I don't know. It just really kind of depends. And even if it's as common as you think it is, you might think about things that you were able to flex into it to adapt the role to your strengths or to the needs of whatever your students are. So just sort of think of it that way, and not necessarily just a good old plain, we could write up a job description for a TA and like post it out there for student employment or something. I think everyone kind of knows what it is. So maybe think about what you did with it and your impact, and maybe that'll make it a little bit less quote unquote robotic of a role. So think about that and maybe play around with it, and I hope it helps.
All right, perfect. Guys, thank you for the questions. Again, if we don't get to your question, please hop on the Student Doctor Network forums, pre-medical section. If you're asking if somebody else has been through it, utilize the resources there. There are a lot of people that are going to be able to help walk you through this. All right, Emily is asking, for shadowing, how much information should we be listing in the description? Example, name, specialty, location, email for each physician, etc.
So obviously for me, shadowing, for many people, you only shadow for like 6, 8, maybe 10 hours. So first of all, do you really need to put in an entry for each different opportunity that you shadowed, given that you shadowed for such a short period of time? Well, you probably don't need to do that. And I think I think what I've seen more conventionally is people will put it all under one umbrella entry of this is all my shadowing. And so you now will have 700 characters to kind of identify who you shadowed, the name, the specialty, the location. Yeah, contact information would really be helpful. And so, yeah, I think that would be very good to just sort of, just legitimize for yourself, hey, these are the places, the locations, and the specialties I was exposed to. You could possibly include a few more things in terms of like, some of the specific types of cases or illnesses, or sort of the scope of what you are looking at. So say, I'm just pulling up an example. If you did neurology, are you doing neurology related to multiple sclerosis? Are you doing it for Alzheimer's and dementia? Is there a subspecialty or a subgroup of illnesses or diseases that you're focusing on? Is there a subgroup of patients that that this clinic or this particular clinician you're shadowing was focused on as well? I mean, again, give a little bit of some insight about what you observed, what sort of things you noticed in terms of the individual shadowing opportunities, and if there's any space, obviously some sort of nod, saying that these, we all, I think in terms of the previous question of like, do you need to spend characters talking about being a TA? Do you need to spend characters talking about about shadowing? Because everyone kind of knows what shadowing is. You might, if you have space, just say, obviously these are introductory experiences that helped you, get a better idea of what it's like to be a doctor in those institutions. That's probably not too many characters, but I think all of us pretty much understand. We just need to know the information that you mentioned, the simple directory information, and the specialty or practice that you were observing. That's generally, that's general usual stuff that we would want to see.
Perfect. Emily, thank you for that question. All right, your pimple asks, how accurate are we expected to be with paid hours? I work for jobs and it's hard to accurately get the hours total.
Well, so in terms of a number of hours, all I can tell people is please don't be off by a power of 10. So I mean, I think you can usually estimate. And one of the things that I use is in my mind, and I think a lot of people who look at applications, we understand that in terms of numbers of hours worked, we presume people work roughly, 8 hours a day for 50 hours. If it's a full-time job. So what is that? If you do the math, 50 times, now it's not 8 hours a day. So that would be 8 hours a day times 5 days. So that's to be 40 hours a week times 50 weeks in a year. Cause you got to take away, Christmas, New Year's, and all of the other holidays, which probably is about 2 weeks of vacation. That's about 2,000 hours. 1,800 to 2,000 hours is a full-time job. So you could probably guess based on that. So as long as you're it makes sense there, that's great. So if it's 2,000 hours or 2,000 hours per a job per year, that makes some sense. Don't get off by more than by a power of 10 relative to that. This is the only thing. That's the one thing I would like notice. Why are you spending 20,000 hours on a full-time job for 1 year? That gets weird. So don't make obvious errors like that.
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm going to interject a personal question. I was in the military. That's like a full-time thing all the time. Would that be the time when you go, it was 5 years and all those hours? Because that's literally what it is. Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
I mean, again, I think if you're military, I mean, we understand that it's not 40 hours a week.
That would have been great. But yeah, kids, don't join the military. All right. Another question here. One moment, please. Okay, so piggybacking on the contact info question, this is pretty relevant here. What do I do if I don't put in contact information for an activity like in a hobby, or if my supervisor retired, moved, or they're dead?
So basically, I just assured you from the earlier question, both those of us in admissions just do not have the time to go and check on all of your contacts. So if you don't put contact information for an activity, it's not going to raise huge red flags, especially if you're talking about, hey, I do pick up basketball or volleyball or something like that. And there's no supervisor. There's no one you can talk to. Do you get in trouble for that? I hope not. I don't think that's a big, huge deal. For those situations where it really does happen, where say your supervisor moved to a different job or a different office, or unfortunately passed away or something like that, that does happen. And so all the best you can do is you can just list the supervisor as the supervisor and whatever the last contact information that you have. Hopefully it's a working phone number. And if anyone were to actually decide to contact it, there'd be somebody there by saying, here's somebody else who can, who you can refer to because that person passed away or something like that. But again, understand we do not have, for most of us, do not have the time or energy to do all of that follow-up. So don't think it's like a big, huge red flag or yellow flag or any sort of flag if you don't have contact information for those types of activities. Do the best that you can. If you had a supervisor, list the last one that you had. That's all we can pretty much ask of you.
All right, perfect. Guys, thank you for the questions. We're running up on time pretty quickly. If we don't get to what you're asking, please hop on the Student Doctor Network forums. You're going to find the answers there, or somebody will be able to help you out. Okay, this is another question from Emily. How do I categorize my research fellowship when only a portion of it involves being in the clinic and with patients?
So I think I don't know who runs your research fellowship. You would probably ask the people who run it and try to see if you can get some insight about it. Because it could be an award, which you could possibly do. If it's something that facilitates your opportunity to work with patients, then you probably have that as a clinical experience, and you can put it as a sentence near the very end. This was supported by this research fellowship. So there's a lot of different options you can have. It's just a question of where you want to place the focus and whether the research fellowship is sort of it sort of helps grease the wheels for you to get access. Or you really want to highlight on, hey, I got $10,000 for this, if you did, for this research fellowship. That might be a little bit of a different focus, needless to say. So again, there's not really a real hardcore answer if you want to focus on it as an award versus focus on it as an opportunity, that a benefit of your research experience or a clinical experience that you got. Again, this is something where, again, there's probably not going to be any one correct answer. Choose the best one that you feel best fits for the description that works for the fellowship.
All right, sounds good. We got another pretty specific question from Ashley. I have 3 research publications and 2 that are in revision. How can I shorten the citations? Was it okay to omit in the citation to make it fit? DOI?
So I use PMEDs myself. DOI, the PMED is the PubMed ID number, which is basic. So if you really wanted an 8-digit number, I would do that. But actually, to really answer your question, first of all, I would focus on the publications that you already have. Now, in terms of citations, you want to be very careful, because I don't know how many authors you have on your citation. I don't know how long your title is. I don't know any of the sort of character constraints that you have to deal with. All I can tell you is, unless you're applying MD, PhD, most people are not going to look up your articles. So you could just talk about the journals that it was published in if you needed to. If it's multiple journals, you could just say clearly, hey, this was published. I have 3 peer-reviewed publications to my name. If anybody really wanted to, they hopefully should be able to look you up in PubMed for your name or your PI's name, and they'll find the citations that way. It is not that important, unless you're applying to grad school for PhD programs, for you to have like the full APA or MLA style citation that, in your resume or whatever else. It is not that important. If you're doing MD, PhD, and you are compelled to put in those citations, just understand you can do that. You could probably do DOI. You can definitely do PMID, whatever you need to do. But don't get overworked by it, because I think MD, PhDs, the publications matter a whole lot more than it does for traditional MD or DO applications.
All right, perfect. Ashley, thank you for the question. Got a few minutes left, guys. Thank you for all of your questions. Again, hop on the Student Doctor Network forums if we're not able to get what you're asking. All right. I was told that I should include a story to help me stand out, but I'm having trouble thinking about one story for each activity. What do you think?
Well, if you just joined our webinar, you missed the fact that I will tell people, please don't do that. You do not need to have one story for every single entry in your activities list. And in fact, I really dissuade you from using that as your application strategy. This needs to be about your professional preparation for a career. It is not about entertaining those of us reading your application, because again, it's not about 15 chapters in your diary. It's about the 15 or 14 or however many most relevant, impactful experiences that inform us about your preparation and awareness of a career in this case, medicine, dentistry, or whatever other health professional field. Now, if you have to be compelled to write a story for each activity, please remember, make it relevant to the important part of the assignment, which is this is your professional presentation of each of your activities. You need to show us what you did, what you learned, and what other major impact there happens to be. And if a story helps facilitate that, okay, that's great. But be very careful. Be very careful with how you draft the story. 700 characters is not a lot of space for a story. 1,325 characters for most meaningful experience is appropriate for a nice short story. But again, if you missed it earlier in the webinar, I don't want to know about your experiences. I want to know about your meaningful. You've got to still address the meaningfulness of the activity, not an experience within your activity. So please don't get too much bundled in knots about having to come up with stories for each of your 15 activities. You will have plenty of opportunity with interviews and secondary essays, depending on the prompt, for you to have example stories that address those questions. Focus that way. Don't focus on, again, you can give us your early draft of your autobiography a different time, or unless it's prompted to you. But do not go overboard with giving me 15 stories for your 15 activities. That is not what we're looking for.
All right, perfect. And Charabel, I hope that answers your question about the gap years and that being a meaningful experience. One more from David. Is there any amount we should shoot for each activity?
When I hope he means by amount is what? It's obviously not money. So I'm hoping, David, you mean by amount as in number of hours,
Yes,
number of characters?
Hours.
So in terms of number of hours we should shoot for an activity, well, first of all, it's got to be greater than 0. Again, I'm going to be very snide about that. I will certainly tell people, and as I mentioned earlier, please wait until you at least have gotten through like the probation period of any job. So that's usually 50 to 100 hours. So I would certainly say once you go past 100 hours, which should be at least 2.5 weeks into a job, that's when I would feel, you probably can have enough sort of courage to include that as a current activity that will be ongoing. So that's something I would certainly tell you. How much should you shoot for each activity? That's so totally different because, in deference to all of those individuals who are non-traditional career changers, I'm not going to cap you. How am I going to be able to cap however many years of experience you had in a different job? So I don't think you need to worry about a number. You do need to worry about your reflection, your quality, and articulating the value of each experience towards your preparation as a health professional. That's what you really should focus on, and not necessarily the amounts. Now, certainly, the more experience you have, the more credibility we think you have that you understand the job or understand your impact. But, is there a set number? I will certainly say at least 50 hours is my rule of thumb. You can sort of go from there.
Yeah, you can go online and find plenty of stories of people who had 5,000 hours of activities that didn't get into med school. So make sure that it actually is meaningful and you can communicate it there. Guys, thank you for all of your questions. We're at the time mark here. If we weren't able to get to your question, please hop on the Student Doctor Network forums, head to the pre-med section. There's also a confidential expert advice forum where you can ask your questions experts will answer them. It is a great resource in future. So something I want to tell you about, a virtual activity opportunity, the Health Professional Student Association Student Advisory Council. If you're interested in this, ignore the bottom. Send your resume and cover letter to student_consultant@studentdoctor.net. I'm looking off screen because I'm pulling up the link address and putting it in the chat. Notice how not swiftly I did that.
It's a great opportunity, whether you're pre-med or any pre-health or current health professional student. If you want to help us help other people along this journey towards being a health professional with whatever resources we can develop together with student input, we would love to have you be involved. So among the things that we've done, we were involved with developing our activity finder program, which you can find off of Student Doctor Network. We currently have a lot of students that are helping us sort of look at and revise and revamp our interview feedbacks database. And we're really, and they're all also very much involved with helping us select our annual advisors of the year for the last few years. So this is something that we hope that is very important to us, to have the student/applicant perspective in a lot of things that we do, so we can make sure that Student Doctor Network and the Health Professional Student Association really, addresses whatever your needs and concerns are. So please, we welcome, if you have the time and you really feel motivated to really want to help our community. We're nonprofit, and I know, unfortunately, we don't pay people to be on the council, but if this is something that is very important to you, to make sure we have low cost to free resources and quality advising available to the masses, anybody who really wants it and can't afford more expensive options, please consider being part of our Student Advisory Council. We would love to have you.
Perfect. Thank you. And next Q&A is next Sunday, same time, last checkup for primaries. So everybody hop back on for that, and we'll do it all over again with a different set of questions. So guys, thank you so much for all of your questions and your engagement. Dr. Chuck, thank you for answering everything for us.
I appreciate it. Thank you. See you guys next time.
Y'all have a good one.